that mall life exists in Israel. It's dying here, but in Israel,
Yes,
it's still,
It's much more active in Israel.
they were talking about why that is.
The mall in Renana was busy. That
Either
one in
it's just
Mojave.
something about Israelis that they like to be around people, hang out around people and walk around and
smoke.
But you can't do that inside the mall, but admit. I admit it. Hi, guys. Hi, Lois. Hi, Dad.
Hello.
Is Judy there also? I see a galaxy. Who's the galaxy? Hey, Jean.
How are you?
Excellent. Hey, Arona.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hey, Stephanie is connecting. Hey, Doris. No, that's Jean's.
Gotta fix it.
I'll figure this out. So, hi, guys. All right, so for your in the studio audience, today we have Jason and David and Liz representing you guys, making sure, keeping it honest, making sure that there's no making sure that what you see is actually what's happening, that there's no use of technology that is somehow
Distorting
the reality.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to share with you and to see you guys. And as much as I loved being there, every second of being there, I'm very grateful to be back here and with you guys. I am. I don't regret a moment of I very much loved every minute.
That one out.
I very much loved every moment of being there, and I'm very grateful and love this moment as well. Okay, one part of my experience upon returning was I thought of the image of like when you have a genie who has to go back in the bottle. It does feel a little bit like that. Like it was a very expansive experience for many reasons. Obviously, because it was Israel. Obviously, because it was Israel, but also because when you're going to a place, there was family, and
Kim Sherborne and Robert Betts all landed at LAX 2 hours ago.
I keep on, I do it, but then all right. So there's also just the fact that there was family there and friends there, and I want to make every moment count. So I'm in a very open space and trying to absorb everything. And that's another piece of it. So when I first got to Israel, that the first day I got there on a Wednesday night. So Thursday, I have this good friend, Shmuel Goodman, who I study with every week. You guys know. Shmuel was in Israel, and Shmuel had some friends that were going to be in Israel at the same time as he. So he organized some day trips. He got like one of those transporter kind of things, that could seat like 15 people. a guide, a driver, and they planned a couple day trips.
Nice.
So I joined them for the Thursday part. And the Thursday part included Shiloh. I don't remember being at Shiloh before. I don't have an active memory of being in Shiloh before. I was excited to go, and it did not disappoint, even though it's an archaeological site and it's not a dramatic archaeological site. But there was something about the energy in that place. You're in that hilly kind of deserty kind of space. There are some settlements there. Shiloh itself is a town, and there's another town called Eli, which is like a little bit higher, like on a mountain, a little bit north of it. But when you're there, where the Mishkan was, where the tabernacle was, you don't really, especially if you're looking out north and west, you're not seeing very much civilization. And there's just something very powerful about that place. It wasn't just me who felt that. Other people who were there also said that afterwards, that this was just a powerful place. Shiloh was the site of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, for 369 years. It's most famously the context for Hannah's prayer when she beseeched God for a child, and that child ends up being Shmuel, the prophet, who she leaves with Eli, the high priest, at Shiloh. So once he's weaned, he's a couple years old, she leaves him to be raised in the service of God at the Mishkan at Shiloh. He is a Levi, I think. So he's not a Kohen, but he's going to do whatever he can do. And part of his training is to assist the Kohanim, but another big part of his training was mentoring in becoming a prophet. And you don't get a lot of the mentoring. In Tanakh, you get a snippet here and a snippet there of what it would be like to be mentored to be a prophet. But a good chunk of what we have is from Shmuel's mentoring. Especially, there's a moment where it says he's like sitting in the Mishkan or lying down in the Mishkan somewhere over there. Aryeh Kaplan says it's a language of meditation in his book Meditation in the Bible. And he hears his name being called, and then he goes to Eli and said, "Did you call me?" And Eli said no. And he goes back, he hears his name called, goes to Eli, comes back, and eventually, and Eli says, the next time you hear your name, you just say, "Here I am." It's prophecy. And that's Shmuel's first prophecy. And Aryeh Kaplan spends quite a bit of time on that in his Meditation of the Bible, that this was mentoring. This wasn't an accidental thing that happened to Shmuel, and that Eli just, wasn't sure what was going on, and then suddenly he figures it out. This was a part of his mentoring. Being able to discern whether you're having a genuine spiritual experience or something else is going on. That's part of the mentoring that Eli has to do. So the first couple of times, not sure, then Eli's quite sure that this is prophecy, what he's having, and tells him, what to do. That's all happening in Shiloh. And in the first couple chapters there in the book of Shmuel. And then suddenly we don't hear about Shiloh anymore. The assumption is that Shiloh was destroyed in a battle with the Philistines while Shmuel is a young man, and then Shmuel's prophetic turn is going to happen. We don't know what's going on anymore with the Mishkan. It's hazy. It's very hazy. The ark was taken by the Philistines and then returned, but it ended up first in Beit Shemesh, then it ends up in a place called Kiryat Yearim. But what does that mean that the ark is there? Does that mean that Mishkan was there? It's unclear what was going on. Where was the Mishkan? I'm saying, when I say unclear, I mean from the text in Tanakh. It's just very, very, a little wisp here, a little wisp there. What did it look like when people would go to the Mishkan in those days? Even when in the beginning of Shmuel, it's not clear, why is Elkanah and his family going? The assumption is it's a pilgrimage festival. Yeah, there are tons of people there. You don't get the sense that there are tons of people there. Hannah is just seems to be alone at one point when she's asking for a child, and Eli seems to be like a sleepy kind of scenario where Eli's sitting somewhere, he sees her come and goes up, schmoozes with her. It doesn't seem like a place packed with people. What was it like? What was the daily experience like? What did the Mishkan look like when it was there? We are beginning the discussion of the putting together of the Mishkan in this week's Torah portion of Truma. And the Mishkan, as it's described in the Torah, has been reproduced in books with color photos from models that have been made. But what was the Mishkan like anywhere else besides the description that we have here, and how is it used? One of my brothers, Yaakov, is working on a graphic novelization of Tanakh. There are a couple of those in the works right now. There have been in the past people who've done a kind of comic book version of it. So he's working. There's somebody who, it's sort of a life project of this person. He wanted to get something done, so my brother's been involved with the project. My brother does the research, he doesn't do the art. But he was talking to me when I first got to Israel. He was sharing with me what he's working on, and he's working on Solomon's temple. Just getting it all the research there, because the graphic artist is going to be showing this temple from different directions, and there are people who've done this with stuff, but they wanted to take a look at all the specs and really try to get the best kind of visual aids possible to do it. And so he was talking about that, and I asked him, what about Shiloh, when you did the Shiloh part? Because the Solomon's temple, the Beit HaMikdash, is in the book of Kings, in the first book of Kings, Malachim Aleph. The Shiloh is in the book of Shmuel. That's the book before Kings. So what did you do with Shiloh? And he said, I didn't do hardly anything with Shiloh, because there's not much to work with Shiloh, even when you're trying to come up with the images. So this sort of just kind of underscored this issue. And if you follow the Mishkan from the desert forward, because again, there was hundreds of years. The Mishkan and Shiloh is 369 years, hundreds and hundreds of years that it's there. There's just so little about it. There's not with the Beis HaMikdash. You have, especially with the building of it and the inauguration of it, you have quite a bit of detail. Then not nothing, because every once in a while, one of the later kings will refurbish it, or something will happen in it. A child king is being hidden in there, or somebody's doing work on refurbishing it. So you'll hear about it. You don't necessarily get a life in the day of the average pilgrim or something, but you still hear about it, but it's not so much with the Mishkan, with the tabernacle. If there's something going on, a dramatic story, so they'll all gather, let's say in Gilgal or one of these places, they'll gather there and there'll be a rousing speech from a leader or something. But even there, it's not clear, was the Mishkan there? Why were they gathering there? What were they doing there? There's sometimes where it'll say they brought offerings, but there's just not, it's very wispy. So this is on my mind when I first get there. Also, holiness in space or place was on my mind because I'm in Israel, and Israel is identified as another level of holiness, the land of Israel, that has a special kedusha, special sanctity. It's also feels that way. I mean, when you're there, it feels like it. So the notion of holiness in space, and what does it mean for there to be holiness in space, and even just what is space? Because when you get on a plane, and I'm talking about experiences we all have, you get on the plane, let's say in Chicago, you get off the plane in Israel, so you're in a different place, and that transition, maybe because I'm getting older, that transition, it takes a little while to adjust to. I feel sort of like in Star Trek episodes where they're transporting and some of the molecules take a little while before they all end up inside. That's sort of it sort of felt like, in both directions. So I'm sort of thinking about that too. What does it mean to be in one place as to another place? I'm talking on the phone with somebody who's here, but I'm not, I'm in Israel, they're in America, and I'm clearly not with them, but I'm talking to them. So we are sharing an experience, but it doesn't feel the same as being present with them. This is something I've wondered about since we've been doing Zoom and stuff, that are we together? Are we not together when this is happening? What is the difference? What is the difference between being present with somebody or communicating with somebody? So that kind of stuff's going on. And when I was talking to my brother, when we were talking about the whole Shiloh thing, we even got a little bit into this thing about how sanctity in space doesn't feel reliably, consistently available. It may not be true of all kinds of sanctity, but like, for instance, if you follow this Mishkan and you just see it sort of wispily present and then suddenly not there, and when you're visiting these places, there's the Mishkan itself, the tabernacle itself is not there, even though we were commenting on the energy of the place, but that isn't the point. There was this thing, this Mishkan there, and that's not there. I'm visiting a place where it was, but it's not there. Or I'm visiting the Kotel. I'm at the Beis Hamikdash. I'm seeing what was, but I'm not seeing what's there. So we're talking about what is it about sanctity in space that, like, compare sanctity in space and sanctity in time. In the book The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel, he makes a big deal about this, that we initially gather in sanctity of time. The Shabbos is the first thing that is sanctified. That's sanctified on the seventh day, and that's time. Shabbos is time. You don't have sanctity of space until this Torah portion, until our Torah portion over here, which is going to be the Mishkan, Asuli Mikdash, make for me a sanctuary, v'shochanti b'tocham, and I will dwell amongst them. It calls it a Mikdash, a holy place. That's so until now, you don't really have sanctity in space. That's a long bit of Torah real estate before you get to sanctity in space, and then the prototypical sanctity in man or in human being is going to be the Kohen, which is going to come up, a little bit now and be further developed, let's say, in the book of Vayikra. So you have, and these are the three primary contexts for sanctity. You have sanctity in time, sanctity in space or in place, and then sanctity in person. The Shlah, he's called the Shlah because of his Shnei Luchot Habrit. That book right there on the far right, Shnei Luchot Habrit. His name is Rabbi Horowitz. He was a Kabbalist who lived in a few hundred years ago. And so he identifies those as the three primary contexts for sanctity. He uses the word ashan, which means smoke. Ayin Shin Nun, that the mountain was covered with smoke when the Torah is being given, before the Torah is given, and when the Torah is being given. The Kohen Gadol enters the Holy of Holies in a certain way, revisiting Sinai. He has to be in the smoke of the incense. It says he has to be like in a cloud. It's a cloud of smoke, but it's Olam, Shana, Nefesh. Olam is world, Shana is year, Nefesh is soul. Olam, Shana, Nefesh. So that's place or space, time, and man. Those are the three primary contexts for what we would call Kedusha. So Yaakov and I were talking about how, for some reason, sanctity in space it has this kind of flickering temporal kind of quality to it. And it sort of fits like Heschel's thing, that where Heschel says that time is a more reliable place for us to gather as a people. And therefore we gather in Shabbos, we gather for Pesach, when we do that, we're gathering in time. I think it was Natan Sharansky who said that for him, the most important Jewish text is the calendar. Because when he was in jail in one of the gulags, and he was feeling isolated and alone, having a calendar, knowing when Shabbos was or knowing when Yom Tov was a kind of pathway to connection to his people. He felt bound up with his people because we were sort of gathered in time. So like Shabbos, it's happened consistently since the first Shabbos. Not everybody, maybe not everybody knew what was going on, but it was happening. It was blinking on, it was blinking off, blinking on, blinking off and it was doing that during every type of experience we had. Since something like Hanukkah, people are experiencing Hanukkah in every kind of experience, or a Passover Seder. People had Passover Seders in the best of times. People had Passover Seders in the worst of times. People had Passover Seders in Israel. People had Passover Seders outside of Israel. In every circumstance, there is a Seder because Passover is happening consistently. It's going to happen all the time. Sanctity in time is reliably there, but not sanctity in space. Sanctity in space is not, for some reason, reliably there. You could, at another time, we could explore sanctity in person because there's similarities there too about sanctity in person, but just staying away from that for a moment, just back to sanctity in space. In most scenarios, the sanctity in space seems to rely on our circumstances as a people. Like you'll see, we'll have exile if we're not behaving properly. That's what it says in different parts of the Torah, and it says it later on in other parts of Nach. Many of the prophets identify our behavior as the direct causes of the exile and destruction of the temple. The feeling was that the Mishkan itself, the Mishkan in Shiloh, which is destroyed after 369 years, that's because of bad behavior that was happening in the Mishkan before that. So our behavior is somehow inextricably tied up into the sanctity of this mikdash. Even here it says, Asuli mikdash, make for me a sanctuary, vishachanti betocham, and then I will dwell in it. The Rabbi Abraham Joshua Twersky, Rabbi Dr. Abraham Joshua Twersky, famously quoted the Kotzker Rebbe. The Kotzker Rebbe asked, where is God? And, students are giving, he's up, he's all around, he's giving every answer, and he's going, nope, nope, nope. And then finally they give up, and he said, he's where you let him in. There, in other words, when it comes to, and that seems to be the crux, when we say that it's a holy place, that seems to be what we're talking about. We're talking about the divine presence. But this divine presence is only available if we make space for it. In other words, our connection to the divine, our connection to each other, the space that for sanctity that we're willing to make in our own lives and in our own communities is absolutely critical to whether there is sanctity in space. And if that's not available, then that's not happening. According to the Talmud, why is it that the second temple is destroyed? Because of unwarranted hatred. Sinas chinam, not unwarranted, but hatred for no reason that is going on during the second temple period. And if you have a condition like that, God doesn't, he can't, the divine presence is not going to be there. So it's not just about our relationship with God, it's also about our relationship with each other, that if these aren't in a kind of proper balance, then you won't have the critical element of what we'll call sanctity in space. Obviously, there is some kind of sanctity that's in Israel, but even that, the sanctity that we talk about in Israel, is it a guarantee that sanctity would be there? There is some discussion, maybe after the first Beit HaMikdash, the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, it wasn't necessarily a guarantee that it might have been sanctity just for that time. But when the second Beit HaMikdash is built, it could be that sanctity is now for good. I'm not saying there's no sanctity, but the what we're looking for here, Asuli Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, I will dwell amongst you, that is something that it requires a certain condition of society and of the people. So somehow we are connected to whether there is sanctity there or not, or the sanctity of that level or not. That may not be the only reason that it flickers, or that it doesn't seem to always be there, that it's not as reliable, but it is a distinction between sanctity in time and sanctity in space.
I mean, what's the difference between that and, what we sort of colloquially call holy ground? Um, and like sort of the feeling that you get, being in a place, Sharon and I took the kids on like a 10-day road trip. We drove around in the South, we drove around, we went from here to Memphis and then down into the Delta and then across into, and so like you're standing on the balcony where, right below the balcony where MLK was shot in Memphis, and we stood right, in the Medgar Evers driveway where he was gunned down, and we stood in, the park in Birmingham where they let loose, the dogs on the kids and everything like that. And, we drove down a dirt road to go to that little grocery store, and then where Emmett Till supposedly whistled at a white woman, and then we drove up another little dirt road where they supposedly threw him off the bridge. I mean, you feel things. I mean, similar to places that I've been in Israel. It's like you're in a spot where something big happened, and sometimes you get like this feeling, this vibe. Is that, where does that fit in to what we're talking about here?
I don't know if it's possible to say with certainty, but there is a phrase that Shabbos is 1/60th of the world to come. So why do they use that measure? Why do they say 1/60th? So it is said that they use the notion of 1/60th because 1/60th is the measure, when we talk about foods, measure of an ingredient that you would be able to sense. Again, this is an ancient way of talking about, can you taste it? Can you, something like, can you taste it? If you have an ingredient that's more than 1/60th, you're going to be able to taste it. If it's less than 1/60th, you might not be able to taste it. So when you say Shabbos is 1/60th of the world to come, so what you mean is that Shabbos, it gives you a taste of the thing. It's not the thing itself, but it's a taste of the thing. So I'm thinking that might be what you're talking about. In other words, that it's not that it's completely unrelated, but it doesn't, like, also, for instance, Nachmanides makes this point about the Mishkan, that the Mishkan is not just a place to connect with God, but the Mishkan is a mobile Sinai. That we had this experience at Sinai once in a creation kind of experience at Sinai, where God not only is communicating with the entire Jewish people, but there's a sense of connection. Israel and God and the Torah are one. There was a connection of sublime unity with God and the entire Jewish people, and that moment of the Torah. It's a song we sing on Simchas Torah. Yisroel ve'oraisa v'kudesh habaruchu chadu. Israel, the Torah, and God are one. So there's this palpable sense of unity, but also a connection to the divine that was prophecy, to the point where in the Midrash they describe the souls of the people just trying to leave to go back to their source, and they have to be put back in this kind of incredible connection to the divine that's happening at what we call the giving of the Torah, or the speaking of the 10 statements. So the Ramban says that it does look historically like that was a once in a creation kind of event, but that the gift of the Mishkan is that we are going to take it with us. And that when Moshe is having prophecy, he's going back to that same place. He's not on Sinai technically anymore, but now it comes to the cherubs over the ark, which has the tablets in it, which is representative of it. So that we're sort of taking Sinai with us. The Torah, it's Moshe's connection to the divine. Everything that's in the Torah after, almost everything that's in the Torah in the 5 books after the 10 commandments, at least the communication between God and Moshe, is happening in that place between the cherubs. At another point on this trip, we were in the tunnels. Every time you go back to Israel, there's just more and more and more in those Western Wall tunnels that they're. So I remember being frustrated because, and I've had this frustration on several trips before, how much energy is spent on Herod. There's so much energy spent on Herod, and Herod he was a great builder. That's what he was. He was a great builder, but he wasn't a great man. He's a great builder. And if you're going on a trip, especially the kind of trips like when I was going on the pastor's trip at the end, like the day 1 was Masada. Then you're like, the next day we were at the Kotel. A couple days later, we're in Caesarea. And all you're talking about is Herod, right? You're talking about Herod. But when I was in the wall, the tunnels by the Kotel, it struck me that this wasn't just, talking about somebody who doesn't deserve to be talked about that much. It was a misdirection, because we were focused on the stones, but we're not focused. We were focused on the house, but not the home. If you had met Coretta Scott King and shared what you felt, I'm sure she would be honored, but that's not what she misses. That's not what for her, that is a sacred place. I'm sure it's a sacred place, but it doesn't capture him. Right? It's not him. It's not his spirit. Right? It is. It's as close as you can get to it. It's like the Kotel. It's not. It's a bit of context, and there's a luster, or maybe even a shine around that you can sense around it, but that's not it. That wasn't it. We don't have it, so we end up hanging out by the remnants of it. So like, let's say a child misses their parent, so they may want to sleep with their pillow so they can smell their parent. They can smell them, but it's not their parent. that would be like Shabbos for the world to come, or those experiences that you're describing, or what people feel when you have in these tunnels, in the Western Wall tunnels, they have shoals in there. They have these gorgeous shoals. I mean, I even have like pictures, like with gorgeous furniture and using the stone in a way that's just breathtaking, like breathtaking shoals in there. And they have people davening there. There's women who every time I've been in those tunnels, there are women davening in certain places. They're saying Tehillim and stuff like that. And they want to get, not just the women, everybody wants to get as close as you can to where the Holy of Holies was, like to do it. But and they are trying their hardest to squeeze out some sanctity from those stones, but there's just there might be a fragrance of it, but it isn't it isn't the thing itself.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
when we bury a Jewish person here with the land, with the soil of Israel, how much of that do we really feel is bringing a holiness there?
If you ask somebody why we do that, the typical answer is that this is somehow going to ease their path when it comes to resurrection of the dead. I haven't heard anybody think that the ground is somehow sacred because there's earth from Israel in there. I don't know. Maybe there are people who think that it has brought some kind of sacred nature to there. Maybe, I don't know. I haven't heard that. Mostly when you try to research that, the source for that, it seems more some kind of technical something that happens that eases the pathway back to at a time of resurrection. So I don't know. I mean, if I would imagine that if it really could be that you got some kind of sanctity with the actual earth of Israel, that you'd have people doing more than just putting it into a cemetery plot. You would imagine that people would be like surrounding themselves with it, or building their houses with it, or something. So
Putting
it's
it
hard
in
to
a
believe.
sandwich.
What?
Putting it in a sandwich.
Or eating it or something. Yeah, so I'm not sure, but it's above my pay grade exactly whether that would be it. But even if there was something there, it would be something like that is so remote from it. One of the things to explore is whether the sanctity is itself about the feeling, or whether the feeling is just an indication of the sanctity, like we're talking before about how we feel at different places. So what does that mean? Does that mean that the place itself is special, or could it mean that there's something inside of us that is activated or ignited through this idea, or maybe inspired by this place? Where does the sanctity happen? Because it says asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, make me a sanctuary and I will dwell amongst them. It doesn't say I will dwell in it. It's I will dwell amongst them. So when we speak of sanctity, maybe it could be argued that it was always meant to be this way, that it wasn't supposed to be about the place, it was supposed to be about the person. That, in other words, that the sanctity, that the goal was for for God to rest in us, and that somehow the place is just a trigger or a means, but that that when we're there and we're not feeling it, maybe that's not an indication of something missing in the place, but maybe it's more of an indication of something missing inside of us.
Can I
Yeah.
address something you're saying? I'm gonna use a different term here, because I'm looking at it from a level of measurement.
Yeah.
How does one measure the sanctity of space? Considering, as I'm listening to the conversation, it's an emotional state more than anything.
Right,
Where the sanctity of man is touchable. I can touch it, I see man.
right,
And the sanctity of time is a measurable piece. I can say it's from point A to point B.
right,
It's time.
right,
You're discussing an emotion or a feeling.
right.
And how
Now,
does one measure it? Because each person measures it differently.
again, when there was a building, there were
You can-
exact measurements.
Right.
Up until this point,
Up
you
until-
could
right.
walk. If you're not pure, you can only go to this point,
But-
etc.
But now that you don't have it,
Right,
what do you
Right.
touch?
right.
What do you what do you
And
measure?
and this term, right, and when somebody says like God's divine presence left, there are those who suggest that the chariot vision, what is the chariot vision? The first chapter of Yechezkel, of Ezekiel, that the chariot vision is a vision of God's divine presence on the move, because he's leaving the Beit Hamikdash. So it's like it's a chariot. God's in his chariot. He's being moved. So and so when we talk about that, like God's divine presence leaving, I mean, what do we even mean when we say that? And clearly, like you were saying, we're talking about something spiritual. It's not subject to measurement. It's not physical.
Right.
Right.
More
So
metaphysical, if anything.
right.
You know,
So obviously we go back and forth. We talk about physical space, measured physical space, as we do in this week's Torah
Right.
portion. And then at the same time acknowledge that it's not about the space. Even let's say, as you get more intensely into the holiness, like let's say you're in the Holy of Holies, there's even elements of the description of the Holy of Holies which seem to defy the rules of space. They talk about it, how it shouldn't be big enough to contain the ark, the Holy of Holies, and yet it somehow is. So there's something at some point, you're right, it breaks down. Also, what is holiness in person? It's going to
Right,
break
right.
down. And in a certain way, when you start thinking about time, it also breaks down,
Right.
because it over here, it starts at a certain time and ends at a certain time, but that somehow it's now over there in time, because time itself is not static. It doesn't stay, it's not the same. It's on the move,
Right.
as it were. So any of these, when you start to explore them more profoundly, they start to defy measurement.
'Cause even with the sanctity of man, there's a portion that is a sanctity of space within man.
Right.
And that is something that's unusual. You can't.
Right, but in some way. But then there's his influence or his impact.
His
Like, let's say you take somebody like the Lubavitcher Rebbe,
Right.
right? And you could stand next to the man, and you could talk about his life and
Mhm.
he had physical ailments. I mean, he was subject to the
Right.
etc. But then you look at the impact and how his life seems to animate other people's lives, and you could see it as a kind of expression of sanctity. Of my teacher, Moshe Shapiro, of blessed memory. So I was around him as a human being, etc. But when I talk about him with my friends, etc., it's not just him. I mean, we tell stories about him, the person, and stuff, but it wasn't just him, the person. The way he impacted us, there's something much bigger than the measure of that person. And so you could say, when you talk about sanctity in a person, you could say that there is a person, they are born and they die, and they have physical limitations,
Right.
etc. And then there's this other thing, which seems immeasurable.
So can I describe, I'll define it.
Yeah.
It's that man's aura, that joking around, I call it the blueness of something, or the
Right.
outside blueness. Of
Right,
That's that
I-
person's aura. is what
right.
I
You
call it.
could call it that.
Poetry,
I mean, you could
right.
use that, but even aura is gonna have to be metaphoric, because
Yeah, absolutely.
people who see auras will tell you that
Yes.
it just goes to about
Right.
here.
Right.
I will brush your aura. You can brush people's aura. Right, so it does, so even that,
Yeah,
you
you're
know,
right.
but so you're using metaphor over there. Okay, anyways, this was just a little bit of sharing about sanctity and space, the Mishkan, the divine presence, the kind of Art Green, we'll call him a theologian. He's more than the writer and personality that is Art Green and theologian. He once said, he was talking about God, the 4-letter name of God. So the 4-letter name is a noun.
Mhm.
It's a noun. But when we approach God, the person, we acknowledge that we can't understand him, the person. So our approach to God is understanding him in the way he impacts the world, the way he moves in the world or impacts in the world. I once saw a reference to God as a verb. God is a verb. And I thought that was fantastic, because it captured this idea that we connect to God in how he acts more than how he's a person. And so I was all excited, and I shared that with Rabbi Cardoza, and Rabbi Cardoza goes, "That's Spinoza. It's Spinoza. It's not what we believe." So because we believe that God is a noun, he's not a verb. So, but then Art Green, he did this magical thing where he goes, God is a noun, but the minute you try to grasp him, he becomes a verb. It's like in other words, and there's this kind of ethereal quality that you can't actually hold it. You can't hold it. Maybe that has something to do with this kind of wispy nature to sanctity in space, because the source of the sanctity in space is God's divine presence dwelling amongst us. Maybe it has that same wispy quality that it's there, but the minute I try to grasp it, it sort of disappears. Or not disappears, but becomes a verb. Okay. Be well. I say we do this again sometime. I suggest next week. I'm very, very grateful that we gathered together. It was awesome to see everybody.
We all waiting
well.
for you to come back.
Be well.
Thank you.